In this video, we're looking at part 2 of the beginning of Lab 5. In this section, it says, suppose that Dr. Anawalt wants to use the program with a different course, one that has more than 4 students. Actually, Dr. Anawalt's not sure how many students are in the course because a few people dropped, so she's not really sure how many times the loop is going to have to repeat. So we want to modify our algorithm so that it uses an event-controlled loop with an indefinite number of averages and prints a message for each. It tells us the user is going to enter a -1 when he or she is done entering course averages. Asks us to make a plan before we start writing in Python. Let's do that in the IPO chart. So again, it challenges us to add the steps for the loop, the initialization step, the loop test, the body of the loop, and the update step. So let's think about what the individual steps would be if we were using an indefinite loop, an event-controlled loop. For an event-controlled loop where you're expecting user input, usually the initialization step is reading in the first piece of input, and that happens before the loop begins. So in this case, we want to ask the user to enter course grades or a -1 if they want to stop. And so we're going to read the first input value from the user as our initialization step. Then our loop test is going to say while the value that they entered is greater than or equal to 0. Because if they ever enter a negative number, then we want to stop repeating. All of the statements that determine the course average are going to remain the same in our loop. And as our update step at the bottom of the loop, we want to prompt for the next value from the user. Oops, and we need to print out the value too. Print the message. So in this program, the initialization step is reading the first value from the user. We want to keep going while they enter something bigger than 0. Then we want to select the advice message based on their input value. Then we want to print out the advice message and prompt for the next course average. Now we already have a good start towards that with our previous Python program. We just have to make a few small changes. The first one is the initialization step. Instead of initializing count to 0, we want to ask for the first value of the average grade. So we're going to move this line up here. That's going to be our line that prompts for the first value, the first average. Then we want to change our loop condition so that we check to see if the average is greater than or equal to 0. That means that the data that they entered was good and that they want to keep going with the loop. I'm just going to leave my steps alone where I set up the message, use the if statement to select the appropriate message and print it out. And now I don't know how many users are going to be entering messages. I don't need to update the count. Instead, what I need to do is read in the next value, the next average grade. So I'm going to prompt for a new average grade down here as my update step. Let's test that out. So it asks us to enter our course grade. If we enter a 90, we're getting the right values, 80, 70, 60. Anything less than that. So it's printing the right value all the time. If I enter a -1, then it stops looping. That's because we entered a value that made the loop condition false, and that caused the program to terminate.